and the already well-off. But Ed Miliband disagrees, calling it a paragon of green policy. And he's pushing for Labour to try and emulate aspects of Biden's bill. So joining me to discuss Labour's green proposals is a visiting professor at South Bank University, James Woudhuysen. James, welcome to the show. So let's talk about this. Ed Miliband, Shadow Net Zero Secretary, is now following in the lead of the Biden administration. Do you think that this is something that he feels passionately about himself, or is he just following the trend?
Well, I think we should never underestimate the influence the Democratic Party in the States has on the Labour Party in Britain. And it's significant that Miliband is called the Net Zero Czar.
Yes.
It used to be that we had an energy department, then we had energy and climate change. Now it's net zero.
Yes.
So this is all of a piece with the fact that the Labour Party policy on net zero is no more gas by 2030. If you look at what they've got to say, the word gas is not there. It's fundamentally unrealistic. Gas is going to be with us for a long time to come.
So you touch on something there, which is this idea of net zero potentially being a utopian world vision. Is it feasible?
Not unless you totally reorganise society. And, you know, apparently we don't have the time to do that either, because it's all so urgent. The kind of upheaval that would be necessary would be enormous. You would have to go completely without gas. You could never fall back on coal. You would have to solve intermittency, and you couldn't really do that at the moment with nuclear power alone.
Yes.
So they just don't seem to be adjusting to realities. The other striking thing about what Miliband's been saying is that apparently we are behind in Britain, America and Europe. This just isn't true. We are introducing the most draconian measures for boilers, for what they hope to be insulation, for getting rid of petrol and diesel cars much faster than Brussels or Washington.
But then do you take on board the view of climate activists, groups such as Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, that unless we act, unless we take these drastic measures to achieve net zero and quickly, we are heading essentially for Armageddon?
Well, I think this says more about their lurid imagination and Roger Hallam's lurid imagination than the facts. Now, you know, I'm not only male, pale and stale, but I actually believe in climate change. I do believe that human beings have industrialised the world enough to have made a difference to the temperature of the planet. That's one thing. To believe that we've got to throw out rationality, throw out fossil fuels altogether, and really hope that a programme of heat pumps and home insulation can overnight speed the end of the apocalypse, and that we can do all of this at no cost to our lifestyles, at no cost to the exchequer. The costs are something that, you know, Miliband doesn't want to talk about, despite the name of the bill that he's emulating, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not. It's going to increase inflation. That's where electric cars are going. They're more and more expensive, and their prices are not coming down.
Now, this might be my prejudice speaking, but whenever I see climate activists on TV talking about this, I can't help but notice they have very plummy voices. They all tend to be very, very rich.
Plummier than mine?
Even plummier than yours. They tend to have double-barreled names. And you know, and nothing wrong with being posh. But I'm just saying, is it not the case that perhaps the people who are most up in arms about this are the ones that it will least affect?
Well, I think that's true. You know, the point is, the cheapest electric car that you can get in Britain today is made by Citroën. It's £8,000, and it's basically almost a Flintstone machine. You know, you can go 20, 40 miles with it. The next cheapest is around £22,000. Now, you know, who among us, double-barreled or not, has £22,000 just to save the planet and make an exhibition of themselves, of their virtuous consumption? We don't have that kind of money, most people.
Yeah.
White Van Man doesn't have that kind of money. The other side of it, Andrew, is that if you look at the number of parts in an electric car, the threat of mass redundancies in the car industry, when we've already got a car industry in deep trouble in Britain, is really quite something. There are fewer parts, less maintenance, less repair, fewer jobs. So Miliband can promise many, many jobs, hundreds of thousands. But if we go all the way with electric cars, and it's quite a big if at the moment, because sales are not zooming ahead, they're still 16% of the showroom sales are electric. That's the same figure as it was last March. But just suppose they go ahead, then there's going to be a lot of expense involved, and a whole lot of people are going to be frozen out of mobility altogether.
A lot of the climate activists, the statistics that they quote or the projections that they produce are very alarmist, and they do suggest that we are completely running out of time. Now, you've said explicitly you're not denying climate change, but what you're saying is there might be other ways to address it. Have you got any thoughts about how we might address it if it's not this?
There are plenty of other ways. Nuclear has a very important place to occupy. Everybody sneers at carbon capture and storage, and they say, oh, well, it's never really been successfully tried. Well, everything that's not successfully tried until you've successfully tried it. That's what invention and innovation is all about. If you look at Miliband's call for, tripling solar power, doubling onshore wind, quadrupling offshore wind, and so on, all of these are intermittent. Britain not known for tons of solar energy coming its way. What we need is something reliable. Hydro has a role to play. Marine and tidal, as Labour says, may have a role to play. There's no single bullet. But to completely abjure fossil fuels just isn't realistic unless you don't want anybody to move around Britain again.
And what about the possibility of developing technology that we're not aware of at the moment? Isn't that something that humankind has always achieved?
Oh, no, that's impossibly optimistic. Andrew, you're a complete utopian. I mean, when did we ever come up with anything except the wheel and one or two other things? No, of course, we have to be optimistic because although innovation is something that corporations are much less interested in today. They're more interested in share prices and financialisation. They're not really going forward with new technologies except sporadically. But we have to hope that our ingenuity, especially around fusion power, again, people are so cynical about this. They say, oh, it's always 30 years away. If you look at fusion power right now, it's more like 10 or 15 or 20 years away. There's a lot to do. It's a question of resources as well. If we pour all our money into net zero, rubber band technology, we're certainly not going to have enough to spare for fusion.
And James, we don't have much time, but just finally, I just want to ask your opinion on this, because it feels very much as though the Conservatives and Labour are really much singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to net zero. There isn't much room or scope there for the debates that we probably need to be having. Is that right?
That's quite right. When Miliband says, look, we're behind Washington and Brussels, what he forgets is it was Boris Johnson who says no more petrol or diesel cars after 2030, no more hybrids after 2035. That's much earlier than Brussels or Washington. So, we're going at it gung-ho, but we've got very little idea where we're going and what's going to replace what. And again, the inflation prospect is something that, is completely underestimated. People can't afford this stuff. They can't afford heat pumps. They can't afford electric cars. What the government is really saying is tighten your belts. Don't expect to drive. Don't expect to keep warm. And most recently, don't expect to have water on a free basis. We're going to ration water now. That's really an achievement for British capitalism.
James Woudhuysen, thank you so much for joining me tonight.